Hello, welcome back. Once again, my name is Kara, and this is a channel where I'm documenting a low-buy, year-long project to help me keep a tight budget, which is going to help me pay off my student loans. And most of the time, I make videos about just my life and how I keep that tight budget. At the end of the month, I check in and share what I was able to pay on my student loans and what percentage of my net income that represents. And in the meantime, talk about other stuff. My last two videos were about how I eat and the way that I keep a really tight grocery budget, and I also eat a carnivore diet. So a lot of people think meat is really expensive, and I suppose if you were to eat ribeye steak all the time and never shop around for a bargain, yeah, that would be expensive. But of course, you don't have to do that. There are lots of other parts of a cow to eat, and it works just fine. So I have my grocery haul and a thing that I shared last week about why I do it for my health and the benefits that I've experienced. And today, I wanted to talk about why I think that it's actually better for the planet and for ethical reasons to eat a carnivore diet, which doesn't mean that you have to do this, but it is food for thought. And I also wanted to share why I find it very valuable and important to eat local food as much as you can. Meat production is not the great environmental devil tragedy that you might be tending to believe based on what you see in the news. There has been a study that gets quoted very often about how cows are just as bad pollution as transportation. And I don't even want to link that study. I don't know its official name, but it has been retracted by the people who made it because their methods were shown to be so flawed that the measure and the comparisons that they made are complete crap. Now, down below in my comments, or not comments, but the description for this video, I am linking many experts in the actual field of animal agriculture who can explain what that study was about and how it was done, and then what is incorrect about it and what the truth is. And animal agriculture is not a major source of pollution. If we are really worried about pollution, we will worry about things like the full transportation industry. We will worry about fossil fuel extraction. We will worry about how our healthcare system is super inefficient and very polluting. We'll focus on those things where there's so much pollution to deal with and rein in and do something about. But animal agriculture is a minuscule part of the carbon emissions that our country produces. And when I say meat production is not the great environmental disaster that you've been shown, I do know and I want to acknowledge some of it is. Especially if we're talking about industrially raised chicken and pork, because the biology of those animals is such that companies have found ways to raise them entirely indoors, from an egg hatching to raising a full-grown chicken to harvesting it. Unfortunately, yes, that's a disaster and very unethical for that animal to be kept indoors its entire life and fed an unnatural diet of kibble of some kind, rather than being able to be a chicken outdoors and scratch and peck and eat all kinds of things that it finds in the ground the way that animal should get the opportunity to live. So, and similarly for pork, there's a lot of pork industrially produced where the animals are indoors for their entire life. And again, like, that's not how pigs are. They like to be out in the regular environment and rooting around and finding, delicious things, grubs and truffles and whatever they want to eat that they find. They don't get to live that way in these industrial animal operations. And that is wrong. And that is a big source of pollution as far as the animal's waste is. it's so unnaturally concentrated. And so I do want to acknowledge, yeah, that's a problem. But when it comes to beef, when it comes to beef, even beef that is finished in a feedlot, the kind that we see the photos of, and we're so worried about the cows, and we're so worried about the environment. Yeah, there is a waste concentration problem at a CAFO, a concentrated animal feed operation. There is a waste concentration issue there that is mitigated as much as possible by using and selling that as fertilizer. But even that beef is much better for the environment than you've been told. And that's because a cow is actually a much more complicated animal, and it has to live outside on grass. All cattle is grass-fed for the vast majority of their life, because you can't keep a cow inside all the time. Their biology just doesn't let that happen. So we can all be happy that cows are complicated enough that we haven't been able to figure out how to torture them quite so badly. And we should change the way we abuse and take advantage of the biology of other creatures. So anyway, cows, most of them are grass-fed and then grain-finished in a feedlot. And then a certain portion of them, due to market demand, and I think it's great, and of course, like, market demand more of this, some are grass-fed and grass-finished. And so they spend their entire life on grass, which is very natural, and then all of these animals are slaughtered in the most ethical way possible. So animal agriculture does very visibly require an animal to die, and there's no getting around that. There is absolutely no getting around that. However, there's also no plate of food anywhere in the world that did not require creatures to die. Even if you're a vegan, even if you raise your food in your own backyard, there's no food that comes out of the soil that does not require death. And that's because soil fertility comes from stuff dying and getting incorporated into the soil. So no matter what, we are actually living creatures on a planet that is its own closed system, and I'm sorry, but the molecules have to get rotated, and that's just how food is. Civilization has been an experiment in quick gains at the expense of long-term soil fertility. When humans figured out how to do agriculture, there were quick gains. You suddenly have a steady food supply, your population grows, people are able to specialize because not everybody has to be involved in food production anymore. You have all kinds of art and creativity that bursts forth because of that. And that seems like a very good thing, right? So there is this quick gain, and we get what we've come to call civilization. That's a good thing, no problem. But it has this long-term effect of stripping the soil. And so not only do you get civilization, but if that civilization is going to continue, once its own land base is getting exhausted, then all of that ingenuity and spare time gets put into the acquisition of more. And that tends to mean taking it from someone else. So you have not just civilization, but you begin to have expansion and imperialism and war, and that's to continue expanding the land base that the people need to live an agriculturally based life. That's a lot of history and anthropology really collapsed. I understand that that's crazy to think that way, but if you examine the links that I've shared, you'd understand some of what has shaped my thinking on this. On the contrary, people have lived all over this planet and been able to feed themselves and have not become, industrial war machines for eons. For so long, we knew how to just live on this planet and eat and reproduce our species and not take over the entire space for ourselves. And we could even still do that. We could probably even still do that and have computers and indoor plumbing. We probably could figure that out at this point. We need healthy food, and animal agriculture is the source for that healthy food, and it also provides for the soil fertility so that plant agriculture also can continue and not be depleting the soil. Just think about, like, if you want to eat a plate full of food and feel like what you're doing is good for the world, then look at what it took to bring you that plate of food. Say that I'm going to eat a plate full of grain. Maybe it's like a bulgur salad, like, what is it called? I can't remember. But, a grain-based food, and it's a bowl full of that. Well, that field of grain might be beautiful, and it might not be a dead animal, but that field of grain should be, and once was, the environment for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and probably millions of species, both in the soil, the variety of plant life that should be there, the bugs, the birds, the frogs, the rabbits, the deer, the elk, everything that should get to live on a grassland is gone now, so that we could grow one thing so that you can have a bowl full of whatever grain-based food you have. That is a holocaust on the environment. I don't know how to look at it any other way now that I've seen this. And on the other hand, I sit down every day to a bowl that is full of meat because I eat a carnivore diet. And I know that that meant that a cow died. However, I have driven up the road and I have seen where that cow lived, and there are other animals that get to live there. And there is a variety of grass species in that field. And by the cow's movement on that land and the pressure of their hooves, they are making the soil stronger. The water can get deeper into it and stay there because it has a stable root structure from year to year. The cow itself, people talk about how much water it takes to raise a cow. Well, it's not like you pour it down a tube and it's gone. That water is, yes, you give it to the cow, and then the cow actually moves it around the land and deposits that water in a variety of places with nutrients from its waste. My bowl of all meat, yes, an animal died, but in the meantime, an entire ecosystem flourished. I can't unsee this, and I'm just sort of at a loss as to how being plant-based is presented as the most virtuous thing. So I also want to be very clear that it is that monocrop, industrial, huge, just industrial plant agriculture that is the real disaster. I know there are many farmers who are working towards no-till agriculture, where the soil isn't turned over and all that carbon released every season, and allowing the what would you call it? Just the detritus of the plants every year to remain in the soil and to get incorporated into it. There are people doing permacultures and having diverse crops in one place so that the soil is more balanced, and some plants use certain nutrients while giving back others, and other plants are participating in that cycle as well, to just have a more balanced and more fertile soil and to hold carbon in. It is just genuinely the annual grasses like grain and corn, and there are others, but when a vast swath of land gets turned over every year, gets planted every year, gets sprayed and then harvested, and it's just and otherwise the soil is sitting there mostly blowing away in the prevailing winds. That's the problem. There are lots of forms of agriculture that people have always known how to do, and more people are trying to do them on larger scales these days, and that is, of course, wonderful, and needs to be supported. If you are near a farmer like that and you want that kind of food, definitely do support them. The real disaster is that industrial, monocropped, giant scale plant agriculture. And this is, it's environmental, and it's about justice to communities, and it's about just the safety and sovereignty that we have over our own ability to eat. Not only does that practice tear up the soil every year and release more carbon every year and strip more of the nutrients out of the soil, and every year spray chemicals all over both the soil and the food. And it's all, of course, patented seeds and patented chemical inputs, and farmers slowly losing sovereignty and control on their own property. It is an ethical disaster to expect that industrial monocrop plant agriculture is going to be the basis of an ethical human diet. So that's the trouble. And any other kind of plant agriculture is going to be an improvement. And then animal agriculture is going to be wonderful to mix with that, or just go exclusively to ranching and pastoral modes of raising food. The animals continually add to the biomass of the soil. The animals continually replenish the nutrients. We actually don't know the upper limit of soil fertility. You know, we've never let that experiment run forever. We've interrupted it everywhere with plant agriculture. But we actually we don't know how good it could get. We don't know how good it could get if we practiced good animal agriculture, rotational grazing, proper management of those animals. We really actually don't know how good it could get. And I think about everything we've learned about the North American continent and how the grasslands here were thriving, beautiful grasslands, deep, rich soil. The first farmers who broke that ground called it black gold. Well, where did it come from? Well, it came from all the ruminant animals, all the bison, and don't tell me that their farts were a problem. There was a lot of bison. There was a lot of cow burping and belching. All of those bison, the elk, the deer, the moose, all kinds of creatures, they're natural predators, and all the other creatures that live there as well, the very diverse grasses, all of that working together without interruption was building more and more and more of that beautiful black gold soil that this continent had at one time. The water table was being nourished so that all that grassland with deep roots was drawing water down into the great aquifers that are now, getting sucked dry and not replenished. We didn't have giant floods across the middle of the country the way now it seems like every few years Nebraska or the Dakotas or somewhere there's an enormous amount of flooding because the soil is so unhealthy. The soil isn't drawing in the water, it just runs off. So I think about this continent before we turned over the soil and started doing plant agriculture was so fertile, was so abundant, and we actually interrupted that. We don't know how good it could get, and we don't know how much food and health could be created. I just wonder. I dream of a future where foodies swear that they can taste the difference between meat raised in Montana compared to meat raised in Georgia, and that it's because they understand that the soil is different and the other plants that the cow is eating are different, and all those factors that you hear like a wine connoisseur talking about. I dream of a time when our foodies are that sensitive and particular about meat. We don't know how good it could get, and I would love to see us think along those lines together and ask for food that is raised that way. So we'll see. Also, in these grocery haul videos and me talking about how I eat and all of this, I emphasize that it's local food, and I'm really happy that I live in a place where it is perfectly possible for me to, even on a tight food budget, eat 100% locally raised food. And I care a lot about local food because, for one thing, they're my neighbors and they're running a business, and I want them to live well and I want them to thrive because they're my neighbors. I like being able to support someone in my town whose face I get to see when I go buy my food, and I know that they made that food, and here they are shaking my hand, and they know that I live in their town and I'm eating their food and I'm really happy and healthy. It's a good feeling. It's a really good feeling. I think that local food is important because all of this about building the soil, I'm a little bit selfish, and I'd like the soil near me to be improving as much as possible. And so whether I were to buy and eat vegetables, I would definitely check with the farmer at the farmer's market and ask them, what kind of tilling practices do they do and not do, and maybe what kind of composting and permaculture, and how do they do it. I would be asking that, and I would want them to know that I care. But even if they're not perfect, I would buy their food. And this is, I think, something really important, where if you go out and you meet your local farmer and you find out that maybe they are not certified organic, or you find out that they are not doing no-till, or they are not using permaculture practices, let them know that you'd like that, and then still buy their food. Still buy their food, because you will support them towards better practices. Maybe that farmer just didn't quite make enough money for the last few years and couldn't put in any investment towards better practices. They are just getting by with what they've known how to do for however long. But support them towards the practices that you find valuable. I think local food is important also because of the sovereignty and resilience that gives a local community. And so it's March 2020, and the world is now hopefully socially distancing each other and just protecting yourself and your loved ones as much as possible from the COVID-19 outbreak, pandemic. But it's giving a lot of people, at least the people that I see on social media, it's giving a lot of people the opportunity to think about the supply chain for your lifestyle. And a lot of people are worried about what happens if the store is out of this or that thing that I tend to use. What if the store is out of this or that food that I really count on? And the reason that we are so nervous about our supply line is that we get this moment to notice how vulnerable it is, how thin the margin of safety is on our food system. Many people, even in states that produce a lot of food, like Idaho, like Montana, places I've lived and known food producers, in a way, our country has a colonial food system where large corporations draw on the resources of rural areas, and that is where food is produced. But then it goes to those corporations and gets turned into other food products or food-like products. A great deal of it is not turned into what I would call food. And then it is sold back to us all through very centralized networks. And that means that even if food is grown near you, maybe you don't have access to it. It might be owned by Monsanto or Cargill or whatever. Now, if you could buy local food, you wouldn't actually need to worry about what happens when that longer and more vulnerable supply chain has any kind of interruption for any kind of reason. I mean, we move food around a lot when actually everywhere in the world that humans have ever lived can produce food, because that's why humans have lived there. There is no need to bring food thousands and thousands of miles to yourself. If you're living in a climate where you can actually live, you are living in a climate that can produce food. It might not be all the different varieties of food from all over the world all the time, but you can make food. And local food gives you the opportunity to be more resilient where you're at and not as dependent on those supply lines. I hope I don't sound like a crazy, prepper or something, because there's plenty of those here too. So I am actually going to stop because I have a few other things that I need to do today, and I have a housemate who just got home and needs to use part of our living space, and I need to share. So I just want to say these are a few of the reasons, and this is some of what shapes my thinking around how eating a carnivore diet can be a very ethical choice, and that I really hope that the people that I've listed in the description could become more widely known, could be the voices that we're talking about and thinking about when we set food policies and when we're making decisions about all of this. So thank you for joining me, and I will see you in a week.